Welcome to The Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 Intelligent Intranet. I'm Mark Cashman, and here with my co-host through just a couple of wires on the intra and the internet, Chris McNulty.
Thanks, Mark. So when we say here, we're also I'm here and you're there.
I feel like I'm close to you. You're in my ear, but I think you're in your home.
I am in my home. Let's get to the topic at hand. On today's episode, we'll be talking with Ben Niaulin from ShareGate and Tejas Mehta from Microsoft Engineering about Microsoft's current state and future vision for how all of these technologies come together. And from Ben, we'll be listening to an MVP's perspective about how all these technologies help customers achieve more with our solutions. We're going to talk about deployment and value of SharePoint team sites. How do they interact and integrate with Microsoft Teams? And how can you get from classic to modern and maintain the governance and adoption and collaboration that you've been running on your team sites throughout? So that's the topic for today. But I do want to reflect, this is very much Intrazone Home Edition. Now, Mark, as you know, I never resist the opportunity to turn things into a sports discussion. And there are absolutely no sports going on here in April 2020.
I beg to differ because I know from things I believe you've posted publicly, and you don't mind people knowing, you might have some off-the-track dog races going on right now. I think you might have a new puppy that I hope I will be able to hear during the podcast.
I do, and sometimes you can hear him a lot, and sometimes you hear him not at all. But we have a new puppy. We adopted him a week ago from a rescue. He is a Collie Shepherd pit mix named Max. And prior to the recording, Mark, you and I were talking about how to get Max together with Peanut. So we look forward to doing that, because just because we need to maintain social distance doesn't mean our dogs have to.
I think that's a wonderful idea. I can't wait for Peanut and Max to enjoy the outdoors.
I also want to compliment, our production team for doing a great job keeping our Intrazone going. Have you seen any of the late night television shows that have started production from people's houses?
Yeah, I have. I've seen the Colbert Show. I've seen what John Oliver's doing, and then just caught a couple of things of what the Saturday Night Live crew did. And I think people are getting very inventive. And I'll tell you, I actually like it when it looks a little rough.
I like that it's a little more homemade. Some of them are a little ragged, but, so I feel like since we're doing home edition, like I should include random background sounds like this, just to make it. Yeah, that was well done. It's a very interesting topic, the extended working from home. And I think it's something I'd like to consider for a future episode of the Intrazone. We've already done one on kind of the crisis response, but sustained collaboration and operations, I think, is something we're definitely starting to hear about a lot from our customers.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of adjustment. I think there's a lot of great things that people are doing. I know from a response perspective, we're putting out a lot of great information. I've seen our partners putting out a lot of great information, training, how to. And then when it gets down to the actual hands-on, there's a lot of interesting material just to see how people are responding to support others, whether that's technology or just showing up or giving, providing, offsetting either income or hours. It's really great to see the response. And I know that will, as you had said, will need to sustain for some period of time. And it is an adjustment. But I also think it's one that you do see people adjusting to, and it's not something I think we all want to do forever. But for in this period of time, making that a comfortable experience and one that we are uniting behind, I think it feels right and it feels good outside of the reality of it all.
I think a lot about some of the theories of constraints, and if you go back 10 or 15 years at least now, the battle between Facebook and MySpace, which is totally forgotten now. But Facebook had the constraint imposed on them originally of being only for educational institutions, which pushed them to be much more creative about the kind of experiences that they had. So these are definitely interesting times. And, it goes without saying, first and foremost, my thoughts are with people who are genuinely suffering directly from this disease, indirectly from the impact it's having on the economy. But I'm also, mindful of the levels of energy and creativity that we're seeing across the board amongst our customers, amongst our communities, and even internally as people are responding to this. And it's actually sort of exciting to think about where this may drive, us to new capabilities that we wouldn't have been pushed to if this hadn't happened.
I couldn't agree more. And I think for this particular episode, it may just be the teaser of what's to come, because I think a lot of what we'll focus on is what got us to where we are today, minus the response and, of course, the pandemic. But if we think about what we hope is helpful of describing what does it mean to go from classic to modern, Chris, I know as we were prepping, you wanted to talk about what is the strategy for the modern vehicle? What are some of the broader strokes that provides? And then I thought I would add a little flavor into actually what is getting modernized? What are those common experiences and components that people may or may not be aware of?
Yeah, it was about 4 years ago that we unveiled kind of the future of SharePoint in San Francisco in May of 2016. That's the first time our customers had seen what we were doing with what has come to be called modern SharePoint. All of those experiences to make things look responsive, be adaptive, adhere to accessibility, and being able to deliver innovation. So our audience who watches everything that we say on the podcast, everything that we write on our blog, every announcement that we make around our events is probably familiar with it. But I think before we get into today's guests with Tejas and Ben talking about modern and team sites and teams, we should probably chat a little bit about modern. Mark, what's your take on what does it mean for SharePoint to be modern?
I think, the first job is really for it to be accessible to anybody who has or has not heard of or used SharePoint. It should be friendly. It should be intuitive. It should be something that you want to use, not that you're forced or pushed to have to use. I think that's one of the pillars of if we did it right, people will turn from disliking or liking SharePoint to truly loving it. And in the extent of, I'm doing my work and it's a tool that I appreciate and it will help me versus it'll get in my way. I think the other notion is it just goes into new form factors for anything that was behind a SharePoint wall in the context of where do I put my content? Where do I expect that everybody in my company is going to put their content so it's in the same place? It's all searchable, discoverable, all that. I think the value, though, is now that never was a mobile experience. If you ever had a 4-inch device with anything SharePoint server on premises or even in our early days in the cloud, there was a lesser than experience on mobile. It wasn't designed to be responsive. There really were very few actions that you could take. You really had to possibly view, but anything beyond that, you'd have to go to your computer or really set a reminder to yourself to do this when the opportunity arose again. So moving into mobility, and then I think just the modern experiences of having the same underpinning that now I think we take for granted, or at least how we position it and think about it, that we don't always think about this now common foundation for everything to have a modern experience. It used to be a really big gap. You'd get into places in SharePoint, and for those that know SharePoint really well, whenever you get into whack layouts, something, most likely, and still today some areas are classic, but for those common experiences of entering into SharePoint for the first time, how it's exposed through Microsoft Teams, the SharePoint mobile app, and of course all the sharing components that we see in OneDrive, SharePoint, and even into Outlook, all are, as people would expect intuitively, easy to do. You can accomplish it with the same level of governance and on and on. But I think it's a foundation that you, like me, probably a lot of blogs want to list something as modern X or modern Y. And maybe today we shouldn't do that quite as often, but I think we really still want to note it is not what you used to think it was.
Yeah, I think that two things that people should remember beyond what you just said about that adaptive user experience. First, that modern SharePoint is really done in a way to make it easily customized and extended, similar to how you would redevelop any other web property using open source derived client-side code and frameworks, so that the skills that you have, from tool sets, if you're a developer like Angular and React, translate far better to customizing SharePoint pages and by extension, Microsoft 365 pages, as opposed to having to learn a particular API that you would have had to learn for Classic. And the other part of it is the vehicle that we use to deliver innovation to our customers. And that sounds like a real marketing slogan. Classic remains a core part of SharePoint, remains supported. Lots of people are using Classic. However, when we come up with something new, whether it's integrations with Teams or with Power Platforms, or things that we're starting to do with Project Cortex, whatever it is, or something that's intrinsic to SharePoint, all of those experiences are being brought to Modern, and they are not being brought to Classic. So if you run SharePoint and you want to take advantage of everything that we're building for you, you'll be able to get it in your users' hands very easily in Modern. With Classic, it's going to fall to you to write the integrations yourself. So when we say Modern is the vehicle for innovation, we want people to extend, and we also want people to take advantage of our extensions.
Yeah, I think it's important. There's certainly a vehicle and where things are built going forward. And you see a lot of that also coming to on-premises over time. And I think one thing you hit on was mentioning that there is a new modern development approach. So for developers, there's a modern SharePoint. For IT pros, there's a modern SharePoint. The whole SharePoint Admin Center has been revisited, revamped. Of course, a lot of new innovation, but some new user experience for admins as well. I think you just released a blog about updating the metadata service. And if you carry that over to on-premises, because SharePoint Server 2019, for example, has the new team site experience, the new communication sites experience, pages and web parts are modern as well, even on premises. The threshold isn't cloud only, but it certainly is cloud first. And it really sets the bar for going forward. It needs to be this experience or a capability that takes into consideration more than itself.
Yep. Coming up, Mark and I sit down with Ben Niaulin from ShareGate and Tejas Mehta from Microsoft about modern SharePoint team sites. Stay tuned. Up next on the Intrazone, we're sitting down with Ben Niaulin, who's head of product at ShareGate, and Tejas Mehta, who's principal program manager for OneDrive and SharePoint here at Microsoft. Gentlemen, welcome.
Hi. Hi. Thanks for having us.
So to get started, it's always helpful for our audience to understand a little bit about who you are, and we want to make this as personal as possible. So let's start with Ben. How did you come to this wonderful thing called SharePoint?
Oh, wow. That was a long time ago. Actually, I was very focused on other products, Exchange, Active Directory, System Center, Configuration Manager. And then customers kept asking for SharePoint, and 2007 was just coming out, and people kept asking it, so I felt like I had to. I did a little bit of work here and there until I went to the SharePoint conference in Anaheim in 2011, and that's where my world changed. I went to things called SharePoints I had never heard before, where I met the speakers. Well, I didn't know they were speakers till I met them in the session the next day and realized, they're people just like me, and we're just doing things we love. And then that just naturally made me slide into the whole SharePoint world, Office 365 world, and today, the Intrazone.
Ben, where are you calling in from today?
Today, I'm here in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, but more specifically, inside my house. Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times, Ben, when somebody talks about their journey into SharePoint, that they started with Exchange and that they started many, many years ago. And it's obviously, for me, being as a part of the community as you are, seeing you navigate through different products and projects, and certainly being a great face to ShareGate. It's really great to have you here today, but it's also just been a pleasure to watch your journey as well.
Absolutely. It's been really fun. I think the big part of SharePoint and why so many slide into it is, one, the community, and two, SharePoint really is a great product as making people feel like heroes. You don't always need to be a developer. You can build amazing things for your organization, and that's really how it draws so many people.
So if we're talking about SharePoint, the product, that leads us into Tejas, who is on the SharePoint product team. Tejas, how did you get here and give us a little insight of who you are?
Thanks, Mark. So I'm Tejas. I'm a PM on the SharePoint Experiences team currently. I've been at Microsoft for a while now. It's coming up on 14 years. I started out doing non-SharePoint things, focused on identity and access products, in some of our security offerings. If you recall the Forefront brand, things for like information rights management, Active Directory, Forefront Identity Manager, all of our sort of threat protection, antivirus, anti-malware software. I worked as a product manager on a number of those offerings for a few years before sort of hearing the call to SharePoint. So about a decade ago, actually, I joined the SharePoint marketing team. And Mark, I was on the same team as you. I started on a few different roles on the marketing team. I was the product manager at the time, responsible for enterprise content management, e-discovery, and OneDrive for Business back when it was known as SkyDrive Pro. I did that for a few years, but I've since moved over in the last 4 or 5 years to the engineering team and have been working on team collaboration experiences. So I was the person responsible for team site integration with Office 365 Groups platform. So the work that we did around making sure that every team site gets a group and every group gets a full team site. Features like Groupify. And then more recently, really embarked on this journey to help bring the richness of SharePoint collab experiences into Microsoft Teams, from doclibs to pages to lists to Teamify. Currently, I'm now focused on a lot of the work that we're doing on our portals and publishing system to really help make it easier for our customers to build great internet sites. And as part of this, I'm also continuing to look at further integrations with Microsoft Teams, making site experiences inside of Teams really awesome. So I've been in kind of the SharePoint orbit for about a decade now. And I think to Ben's point earlier, what I really love, not just about the product team and getting to work on really great product that touches a lot of people, is that community. Whether it's SharePoint conferences, MVP calls, customer connections, it's just amazing to see how passionate our customers are about the things that we do. It gives me personally a lot of energy and excitement to continue to work in SharePoint.
Well, thanks. We're talking today about team sites, which has been one of the foundational building blocks of SharePoint going all the way back to the earliest days of on-premises as well. So Tejas, if you think over the last couple of years, in talking to customers and watching this market evolve, what do you think the number one ask people have of team sites as they're continuing to use them as part of their architecture?
Sure, Chris. I think if we think about team sites in the sphere of team collaboration all up, I'd say the overarching feedback that we've been getting from customers is really about bringing together all of Microsoft's assets together. So if you sort of rewind back about 3 years ago, we had team sites in SharePoint, distribution lists and sort of group mailboxes in Exchange and calendars there. Project plans are scattered, across a multitude of different products, really forcing our customers to create and manage all of these different assets independently, effectively for the same group of collaborators. So with the advent of 365 groups, I think, what we've done to kind of address that sort of disparate need on the part of customers to go and manage these things differently, we've worked hard to tie all of that collaboration together with that shared identity in Active Directory. So you have shared policy, lifecycle, and shared experiences across all of these endpoint workloads. Like if you're looking at today's incarnation of team sites, they do play more of a central role for collaboration across Microsoft 365 that's tied to the Office 365 Groups platform. Teams is really a great example of how all of this is coming to life right now, bringing real-time persistent chat capabilities together with the content services that SharePoint team sites provide. And the nice thing is we're bringing that common user experience for files, lists, and pages across these ends. So I think as a company, we've really bet on Teams as the hub for productivity. From SharePoint's perspective, we're all in. We want to meet users where they are, in this new Meta OS that is Microsoft Teams, and surfacing the best of these SharePoint team site and collaboration experiences there, in addition to what we're doing in the web.
I was just going to ask a question to Ben. If you look at the innovation across the last couple of years and start to hone into the last maybe 6 to 8 months, what do you see as that evolutionary role that SharePoint team sites are playing within teamwork and collaboration? Whether you address this technically or just what you see customers doing, how do you see that having evolved even in the last 6 to 8 months?
I think it changes almost every month these days, and it's quite amazing to see the transition that in team sites. And I like the fact that you specified SharePoint team sites, because SharePoint can be such a broad word today, as we're looking at it as more of a content service, so that you can do your work across the organization. We were talking about portals earlier, communications, and here you're asking specifically about collaboration and teamwork with team sites. And that's really where I see it power Microsoft Teams. In the earlier days, when people were still trying to figure out when to use what type of thing, where I think now is a lot more clear that the SharePoint team site is what powers everything behind Microsoft Teams in terms of files, pages, content. And now what we're seeing at the very least in the last couple of months is that extending that power and realizing that, I don't have just files that were in my chat room with this team site. I have the capability to go much further than that with what's available in document libraries. But I really think what we're going to see is the power of lists that are emerging and growing exponentially, where people can really see what to do with these things that can power solutions that sometimes they went to outside solutions and the internet. And frankly, I think most of the time end up being a little disappointed, where when you realize what lists and document libraries can come and power to your teams, this is really what I'm seeing evolve, at least in the last couple of months, but I think it's going to continue in the weeks to come, the months to come, as more and more people realize that, especially these days, we're going to acknowledge what's happening today around the world. And there is a lot more people going to the cloud using Teams. And that team side that comes along with it is where they're going to start expanding their collab or their teamwork into the files they create and the content that they store inside of List.
I think the one thing I'd love to hear from Ben had mentioned that what to use when, and I'll paraphrase, oftentimes it was, do I use SharePoint team sites or do I use Microsoft Teams? It was always an or. But from your perspective, and certainly what you're hearing from customers, is there still that confusion, or have we passed that hurdle and we're moving on to that next level of depth and use?
I think we've passed the level in a large majority, but there are still little remnants of confusion. I really see customers fall into two major categories these days. Either you're a long history with SharePoint customer and you're starting with portals and intranets, or you're jumping into the cloud with Teams and Teamwork and you're adding a natural, kind of organically moving into your team sites from that perspective. So I think we're past it. I think we're moving much more towards that teamwork collaboration that happens across, and we know that it comes together. But I still see here and there a little bit. I don't know. What about you, Tejas?
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head. I think if you were to ask me 18 months ago, we got that question a lot more frequently. When should I use one versus the other? And I think we were still earlier on in our integration journey. Teams had a distinct files experience that was served up from the document library, but you didn't get the full fidelity experience there. And we've solved that problem. And we're continuing to make SharePoint collab experiences around pages, lists, and doclibs richer, so that they're actually shared, engineered on using the same shared components. That question starts to wane a little bit now. Like as we get that richer integration, I think it's becoming clear to Teams first users that I've got this sort of these collab capabilities that are in Teams. They may not even know or be aware that they're being powered by SharePoint. But then if you look at SharePoint users that are adding chat capability to their existing collab spaces, they're now getting the full benefit of SharePoint collab capabilities right inside that Teams Chrome. So like you, I'm seeing that question being asked less and less. I think our customers really do understand the direction that we're going there. Our work isn't done. We still have more to do to light up all of the rest of the SharePoint collab greatness inside of Teams.
It's interesting. If you think about that fuzzy border between SharePoint plus Teams, that's definitely something I know that we've spent a lot of time thinking about, listening to customers, to designing what that close coupling looks like. Can you share some of our strategy in that direction?
In terms of what we're focusing on in the strategic investments that we make together?
For close coupling between SharePoint experiences and Teams experiences.
Yeah, I'd say the first thing is, as we build out our own experiences in the web for SharePoint, we look to make sure that we're meeting our users where they are. So to take a step back from the question, we wanted to really get a sense for, where are people consuming SharePoint resources? And with Teams really taking off in terms of usage, new user enrollment, engagement, we did a bunch of analysis internally, and we wanted to see what usage patterns on SharePoint sites were like for groups that had a Microsoft team versus those that didn't. And we wanted to really seek out patterns for healthy site activity. And what we found is that groups that actually have a Microsoft team tend to result in healthier collaboration for those groups. So we're seeing users actually doing more file creation, file sharing, a lot of co-authoring, irrespective of whether they're doing it inside the Teams Chrome itself or inside SharePoint web experiences. So I think that has really informed the strategic direction of our investments. We realize that, healthier collaboration can happen if we bring these entities together. So we're looking to, as we make our investments in files, in lists, and in page consumption side of Teams, we want to make sure that sort of in the context of the Teams application, that it makes sense, that users are able to collaborate on or around content that's being served up by SharePoint, but in a way that doesn't introduce a completely new paradigm of collaboration that one might expect if they were using SharePoint on the web. The cool thing is, we actually have this notion of healthy collaboration that spans both Teams and SharePoint, and we have internal OKRs that for shared accountability between the SharePoint and the Teams organization about really driving an increase in the number of, the proportion of healthy teams within the service. So that means we take shared accountability in helping users both communicate and collaborate together, helping them get their work done. So whether it's sort of getting users to chat around content inside of Teams, as well as making sure that they are easily able to find and collaborate on underlying content that's being served up by SharePoint.
So, Ben, if you take those strategic investments that Tejas is sharing and you start to put your adoption hat on, and certainly you meet with a lot of customers, of course, a lot of your peers are doing similar activities. But from your perspective, when you talk with customers about how to adopt this new way of doing teamwork, and if we narrow it down to this Teams plus SharePoint, how do you best position it so that there's clarity, there's the what am I trying to accomplish that lands with them? What do you see best when you think about adoption of this new technology?
It's very interesting. In fact, I love that you said, a healthy team site, because that is ultimately what are we looking for? We're looking for, our teams to have good collaboration, to have healthy collaboration. So definitely love the terms that you used there a bit earlier. Now, typically, there was still a lot or some confusion in the past, and what I've always landed on was Teams is where your teamwork happens. So the work that your team needs to do, where teamwork happens, essentially, that's Teams. It's your chat, and it's the ability to quickly jump to the other things that you're working with, not just Microsoft, other things as well. It's your home. It's your team's home. It's where you work. It's where you call. It's where you chat. And from there, you have SharePoint that's connected to it, that comes with it, and really is the content service that provides a service to Teams to host the content, but to boost its capabilities with that enterprise content management features, with column formatting. We were talking about lists to store things like tasks, like project planning, and going way beyond the content you create where your teamwork happens, which is Teams. So there's the big capital team of Teams where we're having that teamwork happen, and the content we create comes with that team site that is associated with it. And from there, you can launch it into your organization, because SharePoint really is where your organization can work as well. And this is sharing files. This is creating pages that take the content you created in your team and communicating the work that you've accomplished or just sharing it with others easily. So for me, Teams is where your teamwork happens, and then your SharePoint is really your content service, so where everything is stored so that all your products across your organization can work better together. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. One thing I've observed is that Teams tends to be a little more dynamic and work with a little more velocity. And I'm not suggesting that SharePoint is static and slow, but many teams themselves are transient. And one of the things that you do observe is if you look at the broad range of SharePoint team sites, they frequently exist relative to things like comm sites or hub sites to provide a little bit more of a permanent, structured mental map for how people navigate information architecture. Whereas, teams are much more up in your face, and between the chat interface and the individual team chats, there's just a lot, and it's there, it's fresh, it's recent. And when I need to find something that I know Mark worked on last year, I'm much more likely to go to invoke a search to go find the team site where it was stored.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've noticed that same thing, Chris. There is, I think, the notion of some people may have started in Microsoft Teams and may or may not know what SharePoint is. But at some point, they may know that there is a page or a resource that exists from the past, or somebody sent it to them in some other format that's relevant to their team. So they maybe go through a new step or learning to bring that in, and vice versa. There are a lot of team sites that have existed before we launched Microsoft Teams. And I know a feature that Tejas owned was the notion of bringing a classic team site to a more modern look and feel, which included an extra step that you could do to bring it into having a Teams team for chat. But that notion of wherever you get started, some of that's dictated by time, some of it's dictated by the velocity, as Chris was describing, and that the two complement and meet you where you are. If you're comfortable in SharePoint, you can do a lot there. If you're comfortable in Teams or you're not yet working with a lot of content, you can achieve a lot. I know one thing that we try to add to that conversation, which is not how they just come together, but what are some of the unique things that each still provides. Microsoft Teams, calling, meeting, there's a lot of things beyond working with content. And with SharePoint, there's the whole other side of the intranet with portals, and really excited to hear about some of that work. But I think the notion of meeting users where they are, training them appropriately, and of course, building the technology to work through what those different scenarios of how they're adapting and adopting is super important. I know, Tejas, we want to maybe grab a little bit of future mind share with you. When you see what's available now or what's sort of soon to roll out, you had mentioned portals. That's pretty new, at least for when we think of SharePoint plus Teams. Can you tell us a little bit more about portals and direction we're going with further integration?
Sure. I'll talk about the things that are sort of in near state of completion from an engineering standpoint, rolling out, and then a little bit of top of mind to look ahead, which should probably cover some of the question around portals as well. So I think there are three things that I can share on this podcast. One is we talked about Teamify. It's an experience that we've shipped more than a year ago that makes it easy for existing group connected sites for their site admins or group owners to be able to go and add a team to it. So that was shipped a year ago, but we're improving that experience. So the sort of the V2 of the Teamify experience, basically it will allow a user, and we shared this at Ignite last fall, is basically allowing users to select the resources from the backing site that they want to bring into the new team that they're adding. So effectively letting you pre-pin tabs in the new general channel of the new team that's being created. As part of this work, we're going to make it super easy based on feedback that we heard from customers saying that, hey, I've teamified my site, but I land in Teams and I click on the Files tab and I don't see any of my existing content because of the way channels map to folders today. You don't have visibility into sort of the document tree above the folders. So we're going to make it easier for users to be able to navigate up and down the tree, to be able to actually discover all of their existing content for the site that they've just teamified. So that's one set of investments that we're making progress towards. Stay tuned for rollout announcements there. Another is around SharePoint page experiences. So as we think about sites all up, web pages are such a huge part of the consumption experience. And we really want to make sure that page consumption experiences inside of Teams is awesome. We are in the process of rolling out a SharePoint improvements to the existing SharePoint tab for Teams, as well as introducing a new SharePoint page tab, which allows users to pick pages from the backing team, from the backing site for a given team, and paste those as pinned tabs in the channel. But we also allow you to pick arbitrary pages from other sites as well. So that was a bit of feedback we heard from customers saying, hey, how come I can only pick pages from the backing site? I've got pages from other sites that I want to share with my team broadly here in a given channel. So that's work that is rolling out, and hopefully all of you will see that soon in your respective environments. And then the third, again, it was really around page consumption. Not only are we making it easier for users to be able to pin these pages inside of Teams, but we're doing work to make Teams more intelligent, so that when you paste a URL, let's say to a page inside a chat, Teams is page aware, so that when that happens, we unfurl that URL into a beautiful adaptive card with a thumbnail image, some page details, and tidbit texts. And when users actually click on it, they get like a full canvas rendering of the page itself. So it's like a really great consumption experience in the same way that you have with Word, PowerPoint, and Excel files today inside of Teams. So those are three things that I talk about now that we're working on pretty actively. That third piece really is kind of a signal towards, hey, if we can nail really great web page consumption experiences inside of Teams, whether it's from chat or from tabs, the next logical step is, hey, we've got these really broad corporate-wide portals in our tenant, and knowing that we're advocating our users to be spending a lot of their time, or they are spending a lot of their time inside of Teams, we would like to surface the top of our intranet portal-wise, directly into Teams, so that we have one place for them to not only consume all of their corporate comms content by way of portals, but really have like a really great, easy mechanism to then share that content into team chats and channels. So that's clearly top of mind, things that we're thinking about. The three things that I'd mentioned before are things that we're actively working on.
Terrific. So Ben, similar question to you about stuff that you may have been working on. I know you and your colleagues at ShareGate have done a lot to help drive, content, movement, governance, and adoption. Can you share an example of a recent customer story where you and ShareGate have been able to help customers get to a better state of collab using team sites?
Sure, absolutely. And first, I'd like to say, Tejas, that sounds some very exciting upcoming releases. Love what's coming. So very, very thrilled to hear those coming out the door. I can't wait to see them. In terms of customer stories, actually, these days, it's interesting. I'm not going to lie, because business as usual it's not there, obviously. And what we saw is a very high peak in wanting to move to Office 365 if they weren't there yet. But then there's obviously, we need to get on Teams, and we need to get on Teams now. And that's just the reality. And I don't want to pretend like it's not happening, obviously. So recently what we've seen, and again, like you mentioned, we have thousands every month of administrators that are in charge of moving to Office 365, and we have different solutions for that. But the story that really stuck for me was a customer that really they were close to finishing their migrations. But the thing is that often we don't realize when we migrated from on-premises, and this is really the story of coming from a previous SharePoint, if you will, and file shares even on-prem. For me, on-premises doesn't just mean SharePoint, it can be from file shares. And they didn't realize that we also needed to adapt the structure, because if you want to enable Teams at the same time, you need to work at a top level where, I'm going to go technical for 2 seconds, but in SharePoint, we would have a lot of subsites created by past customers. And as you go to Office 365, if you want to get to Teams and adopt the best of what's coming out from what Tejas was mentioning with Teams, with groups, you need to go towards a flat hierarchy where you have hub sites managing top level sites mostly. And the customer really need to make sure that they could do that in one shot and teamify or groupify, if you will. And the second thing is, okay, now we want to enable teams. We want to give it to everyone in the company, but we're also concerned because we're scared that something's going to happen because we're going too quick. And again, it's going to sound like a product pitch. It's not, and it's not what I want to do. But as part of our governance, as part of the protect your work kind of aspects that we have, the stance that we took and that we will take is self-service is on. And so the method that we approach for helping our customers migrate to Office 365, benefit from that flat structure, teamify everything, but it's also to stay in self-service mode as much as possibly you can to enable people to get the work that they need to get done, especially right now. So what we've made sure is that we've enabled things that allow them to detect when something is inactive so that you can archive it, to have frequent reviews of external sharing because they were concerned about, okay, but what if we have external sharing happening that shouldn't be there type of thing. So we help them quickly go from on-prem to online, flatten, and adopt all of these things, but stay in self-service, which we thought was key. And the story was interesting to me just because of the current situation and the time frame that suddenly went from we have a year to do this to we need to get this done by the next couple of weeks. And the stress that it adds. And I feel that everyone's currently going through something similar these days. So if anything, I wanted to say, there's a lot like you out there. There are ways to get there. And one of the, I wouldn't say they're definitely heroes, but the IT administrators that are around the world right now, and not necessarily out in the hospital and treating COVID, but they're making sure businesses worldwide can adopt this remote work, adopt teams, making people continue to work. And that is definitely something that was touching to see.
I couldn't agree more in terms of the touching part. And I think it is a responsibility of the technology to not get in the way of both admins and people who are certainly then trying to get something accomplished. And I've actually seen that the perspective of admins change from wanting to control it all because they feel like they have to so they don't misstep out of those governance plans, to flipping into something that's more, no, I want to enable my end users. I get good feedback off of that. But with the right control mechanisms to be able to say, if you need something, here's how to reach me to help training, adopting, or tweaking a feature here and there. But also just the notion of being able to classify. And I bet your tools help that notion of, in my governance plan, it needs to be X, Y, and Z. And if anything meets that criteria, let me know. If something doesn't require that, let them create what they need and get on with their day without having to do much IT oversight. But that reality of how people are working these days, and certainly the level of support that's required and the response times need to get cut in half, if not more, I think is critical, and it's great to hear it from your perspective. We have two last questions for both Ben and Tejas, and we really want to start out with a simple one. How are you both doing? Ben, how are you doing in Canada these days?
I mean, I'm fine, right? At the end of the day, I'm at home, but definitely can't wait for things to hopefully get back to normal and for as many people as possible to get through this and stay healthy. But definitely fine.
That's great to hear. And Tejas, I know there's a couple of small metas in the house. How is everybody, you and yours, doing these days?
Yeah, we're doing well as well. You know, it's really hard for me to complain. I think all of us were quite fortunate to be working in an industry where, you know, our employment affords us the ability to work from home. It's not the case for a lot of people that are kind of, you know, undergoing some suffering right now, not just those that are contracting the disease, but also, you know, from an employment perspective. We're all trying to stay supportive of each other, not just on the home front here, but also at work. It's been really amazing to see, you know, as a company, how supportive from top down the company has been about, you know, helping each other work better remotely, you know, taking specific actions to make sure that we have the time we need to, you know, care for ourselves and our loved ones at home. We've made some transitions even in the way that we run our meetings now. Like we're trying to reduce the burden of lots of overhead cadence meetings throughout the week. Like we've reduced the times for meetings down to like 45 minutes so that there's at least enough time to kind of have little bio breaks or things that we might want to get done in between meetings. I know we all started out, and this might have been the case for you too as well, Ben, but all of our meetings, we had our cameras on for like 8 hours a day. And, it kind of gets exhausting after a while to kind of always have game face on. And so I think that's the nature of that work is kind of ebbing and flowing a little bit. So we do definitely use the camera a bit, but we also, turn it off if we're tired of using that. We're trying to introduce social activities throughout the work week as well. And whether, we don't have the same serendipitous hallway conversations at work we would normally just by, heading to the bathroom or going between meetings. So we're trying to insert little happy hours or breakfasts or little, social one-on-ones so that we have some banter just to kind of, help bring some of the softer emotional side back into the picture, because it's quite important for us to maintain kind of mental health, as we kind of isolate ourselves. So to net out, I think we're fine. I feel super fortunate to be working at a place where I'm able to continue doing my work remotely.
I was talking with one of our colleagues yesterday about what it feels like for us right now is because of all of the levels of our regular job plus what Microsoft's trying to coordinate for COVID response. It feels like the week before Ignite, like every day.
Yeah.
So I hope that you're all finding some time to take, some moments of peace and gratitude throughout all of this. It's definitely something that I'm trying to stay focused on.
In the midst of certainly a lot of adjustments, some of what we find interesting is just to learn a little bit more about you, in addition to everything that you've shared with work and life. On the life side, we have a fun, simple question for you. What sport did you play when you were young? If you've got a spark of a memory you're willing to share. Ben, start with you.
Actually, that brought back some good memories, so I'll share that. But so I'm from France. I moved to Canada for quite some time now, so I'll say I'm Canadian. But originally from France, and in France, it's a lot of soccer, or what we call football, but we'll say soccer. And when I arrived to the States, I moved to the States in New Jersey for 2-3 years. I didn't really speak English, not well, and I tried very hard, but sports is definitely where I could meet a lot of new people and make friends. We're young. But since I couldn't speak with anyone and didn't know anybody, the first soccer game that I played, obviously coming from France, we play a lot more soccer. So I made like 4 or 5 goals in the first game. Nobody knew me. Nobody understood where that came from. And so all of a sudden, that opened up a whole world of me being a lot more social, a lot more, forgave myself for not speaking proper English. I still don't, but it allowed me to step into the world and be a little bit more confident. So definitely encourage everyone to get out and play those sports. Obviously, after all of this. But it helps. It definitely helps, especially if you're struggling with some shyness or low confidence and so on. Definitely, that story was something that brings memories every time.
That's nice. I can imagine. I thought all this time that it was SharePoint that brought you into the world, but it really was soccer. I love it.
Absolutely.
Tejas, anything you're willing to share about sport?
Man, it's quite a bit of a throwback, Mark. So that takes me back, I guess, to high school. So I grew up in Canada, actually. I don't know if everyone knows that. I'm a Canuck like Ben now.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in the Toronto area. You might guess that I played hockey growing up. I watched hockey, but I didn't play. I was actually a huge baseball fan. I was a massive Toronto Blue Jays fan. I played baseball in high school, in my high school days, mostly infield positions, some pitching. I'd have to say that as I got older, my arm didn't quite last. So I think the high school baseball career was really where I spent the bulk of my time. I absolutely loved the game. If we're talking about fondest memories, especially in the sports realm, I do have a soft spot for Toronto sports teams. So if the early 90s is the time frame that we're talking about. That's when the Blue Jays won back-to-back World Series. Just kind of being in the city when all of that was happening was such an incredible time and experience. Lots of really great memories. But again, being a Toronto sports fan still to this day, the Raptors won the NBA championship last summer. I actually flew to Toronto to catch one of the games. It's just been a great time to be a Toronto sports fan. So there are my Toronto plugs for your listeners.
I usually torment our listeners with gratuitous sports references, but leaving it in Mark's hand, we just seamlessly switched into talking about childhood sports.
I'm coming around, Chris. I'm coming around.
Sports is an interesting topic these days. I see, NFL Network has just reverted to just airing Super Bowl footage 24/7, which is kind of odd because there's not supposed to be American football played right now. But
on the NBA Network, I've been rewatching all of the playoffs from last year. It's how I'm getting my fix. It's either that or playing Madden.
My kids will turn Madden computer versus computer just to pretend that they're watching a game. As we're wrapping up, where can our audience go to kind of follow each of you and get more information about what you're up to? Let's start with Ben.
You can definitely find me on Twitter at bniaulin, BNIAULIN. You can also add me on LinkedIn, and let's stay connected. And if you have questions, if I can help, I'll do my best to help out.
And Tejas?
Yes, I'm also on Twitter at TPMEHTA. And then, like Ben, you can find me on LinkedIn also.
Excellent. We will put all of those links in the show notes, and I'm sure our audience already knows how to find you both, but we'll make sure that they can. Thank you for your time. We want to thank you for everything that you both are doing, both at this particular time. I'm sure you're handling a lot of escalations and calls and getting customers through what they need. But certainly, thanks for your time joining us on the IntroZone today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Up next on the IntroZone, frequently asked questions. Here's a chance for our panel to share with the audience questions that they've been hearing recently, and they'd like to share their answers with the IntroZone listeners. So let's start with Tejas.
All right. Thanks, Chris. I think one of the questions that I continue to get from customers is around their existing classic team sites. And the question is, hey, I've got a whole bunch of these classic team sites in my tenant. Am I out of luck when it comes to using Office 365 groups and or Teams capabilities? And the answer here really is we actually have features for that today. So if you have a classic team site today, it's really easy as a site admin to go click on the gear menu and select Connect to Office 365 Group. And we provide kind of a wizard experience that makes it super easy to create a new Office 365 group for that existing site. So that you actually have all of the additional application resources for the group, and it's all tied together. And then beyond that, to add Teams capability, it's a simple additional step. You put on the new homepage for that group connected site that you have now. We have a little promotional banner that shows up in the left navigation, basically asking group owners whether they'd want to add Teams chat capability to their existing group. And it's a one-click operation. You click on it, we create a new team. The nice thing is all of your content from your team site sits in place. There's no migration to another site or anything like that. And you can actually get up and running really quickly by having an Office 365 group with your existing site and a Microsoft team, so that you can actually have that persistent chat meetings and call capability all together.
Yeah, it's really nice, really, truly in a couple of clicks. Ben, what are you most frequently getting asked these days?
These days, well, I'm going to jump and follow that, because migrations from on-premises to Office 365, I also get a lot of, what should I do about my classic to modern conversions as I'm doing the migrations? And there's a couple of answers to the very big question, right? Obviously, when you're doing migrations and you're using products like ShareGate, we often handle and make sure that we can convert that site from classic to modern, make it a top level so it can be groupified. We even do the groupify for you. So we definitely encourage, as you do the migration from on-premises, to switch from classic to modern. But that also, it's a bigger than just switching from classic to modern, because you also have to think about restructuring your sites in some cases. If you're using on-premises with subsites, for example, you might want to go flat, you might want to use hub sites, and then you can easily switch from classic to modern, as well as adopting these new ways of work, right, from groups and teams and so on. But the big question inside of it that I get is, how do you go from classic to modern? It's not the entire site, right? When we're talking about pages, often I have tons of classic pages that I want to convert to modern pages. And for that, I say you don't have to wait till you can convert or recreate manually all of your pages in the modern pages. You can adopt and choose to use the modern features of your SharePoint site, and I encourage you to do so. Switch your site from classic to modern, even if some of your pages, when we do click on them and we will navigate to those specific pages, will revert back to classic in that site, but the rest of the site can be in modern and benefit from all of what we talked about and all that's coming. So definitely think about that when you do the switch.
Nice. So there's a pathway, whether you're in the cloud or thinking about moving to the cloud, and you both have articulated what to do, how to get there, and obviously there's a lot of documentation beyond your answers, but great answers. Chris, are you getting a similar or another question these days?
Oh, I'll be honest. The one I've been getting a lot, I'm surprised that it still comes up, is the classic, when do I use OneDrive and when do I use SharePoint? And the answer that I give with organizations that are asking that is to really say none of the above. You should be using Teams. And it's not that you're not also using OneDrive and not using SharePoint, but when I work with files through Teams, Teams makes the decision for you in most cases. So if I'm working with files that are connected to a group chat through a team, it goes to the files are stored in the SharePoint site. If it's with a one-on-one chat that I'm doing with someone, it's going to be stored inside of my OneDrive. So Teams helps figure that out for you so that you have to think less consciously about when do I put something in a team site and when would I put something into OneDrive. Mark, what's a question that you've been getting lately?
Yeah, I've been getting a question a lot around the different events. I'll put my answer into what are the Microsoft events that are still happening in some format. And I know we'll get into a little bit more detail in the events update section, but primarily people are asking me, is the SharePoint conference still happening? And the answer is, as an in-person event, it's been moved and postponed until next year, March of 2021. Our Build conference is happening at the same time still, but it's moved to be virtual. And it'll be really interesting to see not only the content that gets revealed, but the format. It's going to be a really big event, but virtual only. And the other big announcement that just happened really this week is that the Microsoft Ignite conference, which was to be originally in Orlando, Florida, it got moved and timing moved to September to be in New Orleans, is now going to be a virtual event as well. So there's a lot of change, a lot of content to come, a lot of places to meet and network and ask questions and get training. That will all still continue. But on those three main events that we participate, all of us in, certainly a lot of the motion has been moved to virtual. And of course, a lot of the in-person is TBD or postponed far enough out where it won't impact people scheduling and even having to think about it right now. Great questions, everybody. Thank you for your insights. Thanks for providing the answers. And we'll move on now to talk a little bit more in depth about events.
Up next, we'll take a look at upcoming events. We begin at the outset by noting that many live in-person events at this point have been either canceled or postponed or moved to virtual delivery, which I think is a really exciting opportunity. Here at Microsoft, I've been involved in a number of the planning meetings going on, and it's really helping us rethink, does it make sense to deliver everything in 75-minute live chunks anymore? Does it make sense to bring people in for a 2.5-hour keynote? So I know it's going to be really interesting to experience over the next year how we reimagine the best ways to gather our community together for learning, insight, and communication.
Yeah, we have a big event that we've announced a while ago is now digital, happening about the same time. It's the Build 2020 event, and this has gone completely digital. That'll be on May 19th through the 21st. And as Chris mentioned, the team is really reviewing how to provide big announcements, from our senior executive leaders and down to very snackable components, knowing that you can't just sit all day long like you might when you went to a live and in-person conference hall where you get up and walk around and you get to network and mingle. But they really are focusing on having this be a really tier one experience for how you engage, both for viewing and listening announcements, but also being able to provide your input, being able to sit in on smaller sessions so that you can have roundtable discussions. It'll be very interesting, and I think it'll actually be a pillar for us in lessons learned coming out of it, and obviously paving the way for how we can do this and do it well at scale.
Also coming up on May 6th, the Microsoft Business Application Summit, which is a place to experience everything that we're doing with tool sets like the Power Platform and Microsoft Dynamics, coming in a fully digital experience on May 6th.
And you will hear a lot in these different events from the SharePoint team, the OneDrive team, Yammer, Stream. But to be clear, the SharePoint conference that was scheduled for this year in May is now postponed until March 23rd through the 25th in 2021. And that's currently planned to be in Las Vegas, Nevada. But to be clear, you will hear from the SharePoint team and lots of innovation to come, announcements at Build and other places. So even though the conference has gone away, we're still working on getting a lot of the new innovation we have talked about, and of course, a lot of things that we haven't yet shared. So many disclosures to come, but in-person SharePoint conference has been postponed until March of next year.
Also moving to a digital format will be Microsoft Inspire, which is our conference focused on our extended partner community, originally slated to be held in Las Vegas. It will be moved to a far more air-conditioned environment for most of us, better known as our kitchen. Microsoft Inspire will be also held in July of 2020.
And the last thing that we wanted to mention, we always talk about SharePoint Saturdays. They always maintain their site very well. So if you go to spsevents.org, you'll see that a number of the events have been postponed and not all of them have new dates. And some that are either far enough out or are listed currently as taking place. Consider those always a great place to plug in. And I have seen a number of the SharePoint Saturdays go virtual. So everybody's experimenting and doing a wonderful job of continuing the learning, the networking, and of course, being responsive to the needs of the regional. So go to the SharePoint Saturdays website. Again, many postponements you will see, but a lot of updated information for how you can engage with SharePoint Saturdays.
And of course, if you're sponsoring an upcoming event that we haven't mentioned, please reach out to us at theintrozone@microsoft.com, and we'll be sure to spotlight your event in an upcoming episode.
Many thanks again to our guests, Benjamin Niaulin and Tejas Mehta. Check out our show page for links to all of what we discussed today and more. Go to aka.ms/theintrozone. And if you're curious about other Microsoft shows, check out aka.ms/Microsoft/podcasts and listen to a new show today.
We would welcome your reaching out with questions or feedback for the Microsoft engineering and product teams. You can contact us at theintrozone@microsoft.com or on Twitter @SharePoint, @mcashman, and @cmcnulty2000. Of course, word of mouth from a safe social distance is still the best way people find out about podcasts. If you like this show, please help us educate more folks. Share that SharePoint love. You can subscribe at your kitchen counter. You can subscribe sitting around your couch or wherever you get your podcasts these days.
We are your hosts, Mark Cashman and Chris McNulty. You've been listening to The Interzone, a show about the Microsoft 365 uppercase and lowercase teams intelligent intranet.